interrupting live. Let me turn my microphone on. That will help. Won't it? Better.
Benny, do you have your laptops muted?
Yeah,
Okay.
I muted my laptop.
I did, when Denise and I were up here a moment ago, I muted it.
Okay.
I think I muted it.
Better that time. Yeah, the speaker's muted. I'm not sure if I muted the microphone. We'll try this and go. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Thursday, March 26th meeting of the Safe and Successful Kids Interlocal Board. I'd like to call this meeting to order and recognize that the Open Meetings Act is posted at the back of the room. We are practicing safe social distancing for this board meeting. As you can see, if you're watching from home or watching on the channels, all our board members are spaced distance from each other. And we also have additional viewing options here in the council chambers. There are rooms that we can separate where the attendance can be kept under 10 people. If you would like to come and participate, you will be given a chance to come in.
I can't hear anything.
We'll make sure everyone is better or worse. Ms. Byer, we can hear you. Do you have us muted? I hope that works out. We'll continue with our meeting. The next thing we need to do is establish a quorum, and I'd like to ask Angie to call a roll call of members present.
I can't hear anything.
If she can't
This
hear
is
anything-
Barbara.
If I ask her, can she hear me, and she can't.
Stand by,
It
Barbara.
doesn't do any good, does it?
I can't hear anything.
We'll take a moment while we try to work out some technical difficulties with our participation, and we'll come back in just a second. Everybody hold tight. Make sure you wash your hands and keep watching.
The whole place smells like.
Hand sanitizer? We have a somewhat ambitious agenda today. We have 7 agenda items we'll get through, including the presentation. As soon as we get some audio technical difficulties fixed, we will continue. I feel like I should sing elevator music while we're waiting. Do, 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 do. Or a nice TikTok,
It is.
or some nice TikTok videos about hand washing.
I could put one up.
Yeah.
I'm hearing music on this one.
I'm not sure how to help test if she can hear us yet or not.
I think they're texting her is what they're doing.
They're working on it back there, apparently nobody can hear anything. Jocelyn is also trying to zoom into the meeting.
Yes. She was on, I don't see her now. Oh, maybe I,
Is Barb, can we see Barb?
No,
Maybe Barb needs to call in again.
she's called in.
It sounds like it's, everybody can't hear us.
so I'm gonna press mute. Jamie, are we good to go? Okay.
Watch the live feed.
Yes.
And we just wouldn't have participating. Give it a couple minutes.
Or they can
Okay.
call in or text.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll give him a couple minutes. He thought he had a solution, so we'll.
And for Barb, for a live feed, we can just do a cell phone.
I was worrying about that too.
Just put a cell phone out there in the middle of the.
With the speaker.
Or by media, Barb would have it.
Everybody else can just watch
And
on
everybody else can
TV
just
and
watch.
be texting if they have anything.
If it's not ready in a couple minutes, I can call Barb real quick.
Yeah, let's plan on that. We'll do it in a couple of years.
So yes, 12:20 now, let's say by 12:25, if nothing's fixed, we move on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's do that.
Okay.
Benny, what we were thinking is we'd call Barb by phone.
Just an old-fashioned conference call.
old-fashioned, we'd ask staff to just watch the live feed then, and if anything comes up, got the text here, and we'll handle it the old-fashioned way.
Thank you, Mindy. Thank you all. And if you're in the audience watching, we are working out some technical issues, and we will proceed in just a few moments.
And the only action item today is the minutes.
Yes.
That's the only action item, so.
And we're at step 2 right now with a roll call, so we want to make sure that we don't break any rules.
Come on, Benny. I'm a rule breaker.
We made it.
You know
we made
that.
a quorum. We've got 2 from each side
That's
in the room.
right.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
We could proceed, right? And still be legitimate. We can't tell her to, hey, Barb, can you hear us yet? Ground control to Barb by her.
Call her and put her up here.
I'm gonna unplug the feed, tell them to switch over to YouTube.
Tell them to switch to YouTube.
And just watch and listen.
Stay on the Zoom, but watch the meeting on YouTube. We'll feed it to them.
Can you?
Adele, can you hear me?
You can send that message by chat.
You need to come to your chat. It's doing something.
Okay, does that work?
It's ringing.
Hi, Barb, this is John. I think we're just gonna,
It's a great question. I will find it for you. Thank you, Justin. I will type.
by Benny so that you can watch via Zoom, and you'll be able to hear the action
And
on
actually-
VS just from the cell phone.
Actually,
Is that all right?
Bo just, or, I think.
Jamie.
Okay,
just
I'm gonna
did it.
switch
He
the
just sent a
speaker now,
message
so
out.
you'll be live speaker
Go
with the room.
sound, stay on Zoom and switch to video on
All
YouTube,
right,
watch
thank
the meeting on YouTube.
Thank
Yep,
you,
so
John.
we've got it done. Thank you, Jocelyn.
Can you hear us, Barb?
And there's a go button.
Okay, Barb, are you there?
And a green button here, John.
Can you hear us now?
Yeah, I can hear you, Kathy.
We should be able to hear Benny, but I have mom.
Hi, I'm Benny. Ms. Byer, can you hear me, Barb?
I can hear you some.
Shall we try this again?
Yeah.
I think so.
Thank you again for joining us. We seem to have most of our technical issues worked through. We're at item number 2 on our agenda, roll call. Angie, would you call a roll for us?
Go ahead and turn on your speaker, Benny.
Turn on.
And maybe go ahead and mute yours.
Like this.
Submarine.
Yeah.
This is 20,000 leagues under the sea. Barb, I can see you. I can see
Yeah.
I can see your eyes. You look like Wilson.
Okay.
I can't see the,
Barb, you're gonna need to log in on the YouTube feed. The feed in from the channel was creating an audio loop. Do you have the YouTube channel?
That doesn't work at all for me. That's okay. I think I'm gonna have to be excused from this meeting.
We have enough board members participating to have a quorum and establish and hold our meeting. Ms. Byer, I'm sorry you weren't able to participate, but we appreciate your efforts.
Yeah.
okay.
Let's have a roll call. Item number 2 on our agenda to establish the members present.
Okay, Barbara Byer.
She's excused.
Yes, excused. Thank you.
Leary and Gaylor Baird.
Also excused.
Lenny Boswell.
Present.
Kathy Danick.
Here.
Richard McGinnis.
Here.
Benny Shope.
Here. We have enough for a quorum and establish our meeting. Let's move to our next agenda item, which would be approval of the minutes from our November 14th, 2020 meeting.
Move approval of the minutes as printed.
I second.
I have a motion by Board Member Danick and a second by Board Member McGinnis. Is there any discussion of the minutes? Hearing none, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Boswell,
Yes.
Ms. Danik,
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis,
Yes.
Mr. Shob.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you very much. Item number 4 on our agenda is our public comment portion. If there are speakers in the room that would like to address any issue of the Safe and Successful Kids program, now would be a time to come forward and speak. I will do, if you have anyone in the auxiliary rooms or in the hallway that would like to speak. Mr. Johnson just informed us that no one's in the hall. Anyone in the auxiliary room? Seeing no one coming forward, I think we'll go on to our next agenda item number 5, update regarding the amendments to the School Resource Officer Memorandum.
Thank you very much. In the fall, we had shared with you the changes that were required in our School Resource Officer Memorandum of Understanding by the passage of LB 390. You had asked for information after we had made the changes so that you were aware what those changes were and those that occurred. There is a PowerPoint that I will go through, but what you have, the red line version that you have immediately behind the minutes is what's captured on the PowerPoint. So you could look at either place and see the information. Looking at the information in the PowerPoint, it's moving on one screen, not the other, so hang on one second. Okay, there we go. The existing language that you see is the black text. Is that what you?
No, keep going.
So in the red line version, the existing language is in black text. The recommended changes that we'll be bringing forward for signatures in the red text. The PowerPoint that we're using is the exact same PowerPoint from the fall. We've replaced what we thought in that PowerPoint was our prediction of what was going to be there with the red text describing what's actually in the changes. To get to this point, we met with representatives from the city, Lincoln Police Department, Senator Pansy Brooks, ACLU, and Lincoln Public Schools. We discussed the components that would go into a model SRO MOU. NDE, as required by law, produced that model. And so since that model was produced, we met to align our existing SRO with that model SRO MOU that NDE has put forward. We presented to the Lincoln Community Learning Centers Board on February 27th to receive feedback. We're sharing with you today, and then it will go for signatures following today. So the requirements, if you look at in the original sections, or the requirements, Section 4 identified school or police policies that regarding notification of intent to interrogate students. 5 required identifying school or police policies regarding the process for notifying students of their rights. And requirement 6 from LB 390 required identifying policies that addressed what behaviors are referred to in that as far as police regulations. Those now exist and have been addressed in Section 2, this is on page 2, in subsections 5, 6, and 7. So you'll see there that LPD shall inform LPS of its policies that address parent or guardians when they'll be notified or to be present if a student is subjected to questioning interrogation by an SRO. Notice that's LPD shall inform LPS. These are LPD policies. LPS is responsible then for communicating with their family. The same model of action is then copied in subsection 6. LPD shall inform LPS of its policies that address under what circumstances it shall be a student shall be advised of their rights. Again, following LPD policy, communications platform through LPS to its families. And subsection 7, shall LPD and LPS shall both comply with the school's rules and standards concerning the type and category of student conduct or action that will be resolved as a disciplinary action and what will be referred to as school resource officers. That's an existing law that's already been in place. We get together with the county attorney each year to determine what that is, and that's communicated with families. Requirements to ensure data is collected in that same subsection, or section 2, subsection 8. It requires LPD to keep records on each student that's referred by the SRO. That information is then shared as part of our data collection. That's the data that you will receive this coming October. So that information will come back to this same board in our October report. Additionally, under LB 390, there was a requirement for training. This is captured in section 3 of the MOU. So then the changes are reflected in this subsections 1 and 2 describe the training requirements. So, and then subsection 3, training completed prior to the adoption of this MOU continues to count. So all the incredibly good work that the city, Lincoln Police Department with its SROs and LPS through administrators, all that continues to count. Then identifying student and parent complaint process was a requirement under LB 390. Number 7, this requirement is met in section 4, subsection 1, where it requires LPD to inform LPS of its complaint process and requiring LPS, again, to share with the students. You'll notice that continued pattern, LPD policies and practices for the police officers, communication process through through the Lincoln Public Schools, and then cooperative training together. So for the timeline, this is the timeline we gave you before. We have now gone through the November, NDE develops the model. The December 1st guidelines where we've looked at the MOU, they've made that public. Now we're in the December through March 2020, people coming together to develop what we think is the best model going forward. It's the red line that's in front of you. And what will happen after that is we'll go forward with in April to sign that agreement and begin the communication of those guidelines. All those different communication steps with our community. A lot of that will take place in the important information booklet that's sent out to every single family and every single new registrant in Lincoln Public Schools. And that continued communication happens throughout the year as we have new students join. Be happy to answer any questions on that process, or some of the people that are on Zoom will also help answer.
Thank you, Mr. Neal. Questions from the board? Mr. Boswell?
Thank you, Benny. So I want to start by just making a comment to say thank you to LPS staff, city staff for working on these changes and updates to the MOU. I also in particular would like to call out Senator Pansing Brooks and thank her for her work on this very important topic. You may recall that when we were originally discussing the interlocal agreement, the question of an MOU between LPS and LPD regarding these matters was of great concern to community members. And at the time, board members for both the city council and for the school board promised that we would not only adopt an MOU, but that we would come back and review that MOU and continue to revise it. So one, thank you for helping us continue to make good on that promise. And then two, I would also like to ask, another part of that promise was to review the data collected on how all these activities are tracked, and so that information could come back. And that has not happened yet. It wasn't expected to happen yet, but it will obviously drive potentially further changes to the MOU as we go forward if we see things in the data that need to be addressed. So just as a reminder and as a way of setting expectations with the community with respect to timelines on that data, could you let us know when will we see that data and start reviewing that?
Absolutely. The data is being collected as we speak, and it goes throughout the 1920 school year. So we'll no longer have that data. You know, the data stopped the day that the students quit coming to school, but so it's being collected and analyzed now. The report will come to this board in October. So our October meeting, you'll see the first official unveiling of that data.
So then the timeline for these particular revisions, they're going to both the Board of Education and the City Council in sort of an April timeline for us?
They're going to the superintendent and Chief Blymeister for signature.
Okay. So is there a vote of either body?
There's not a requirement for a vote of either body. It just goes for signature. It's coming to this board for review and any feedback.
Okay. So then in October, then we'll start being presented data on the effects and how this has impacted students. That would start a new process of review so that we could then bring additional changes back to this board probably some point in 2021?
Correct. It would be part of just our annual cycle. So every year that October review of the data would then lead to recommendations if there would be for change either in the MOU or for practices, because many times there might be change in practices that don't require a change in the MOU. They just require a revamping of how we do a particular practice.
Thank you. That answers my questions, and so I will just at this time renew my pledge to continue to monitor this MOU, to continue to look at the data, and to be part of the process of ensuring that it reflects the needs and the concerns that were presented to our board when we first put this agreement in place. So thank you, John.
Very good.
Thank you, Mr. Boswell. Other questions from the board? I don't see any hands up in the Zoom, so I think we're okay to proceed. Before you step away, I want to echo what Mr. Boswell said. We did make pledges to the community, and we take those seriously, and we will continue to monitor this. Thank you. The next thing on our agenda is the budget. First reading of an introduction of budget. Who will help us with that?
Chairman Shob, I'm going to go ahead and help you with that. I'm going to ask John to go ahead and pull it up on our device here. My name is Denise Pierce. I work for the City of Lincoln Parks and Rec Department.
Yay.
Yes, yay. I, along with John Neal and Nola Derby Bennett, will be tag teaming the budget piece of the presentation today. I wanted to start at the beginning and talk just very briefly about the interlocal agreement that we signed 2 years ago, the city and the school district. You might remember that pursuant to that interlocal agreement, we provided funding for 3 main programmatic areas. The first area would be that protective programming. Those are the officers that are in our school. That's what you will see in blue on your budget sheet that you have in front of you. The second of the 3 is the preventive programming, which is that behavioral health funding, and that's what you're going to see in orange on your budget sheet. And then the third and final category was that proactive programming. That's our CLC funding, and that's what you'll see in green on your budget sheet. So that interlocal agreement that the 2 entities signed a couple years ago also set forth a formula and then a framework for putting together the interlocal board's budget each fiscal year. First, I'd kind of walk very briefly through what that framework is. First, the city and the LPS each designate a contribution amount for interlocal funding. That amount under the interlocal agreement cannot go up more than 5% each year. So we add those 2 numbers together, and then we deduct the city CLC expenses. And that comes up with what's known as the net program funding. And that net program funding is important under the interlocal agreement because the agreement has some certain ceilings and floors that you apply against that net program funding. So for police officers, the interlocal agreement says you can spend no more than 30% of that interlocal funding on police officers. For CLC programming, the interlocal agreement says you have to spend at least 40% of that net program funding on CLC funding, or on CLC programming. The interlocal agreement does not have either a ceiling or a floor then for that third category, that behavioral health funding. So with that framework in mind, I'll just walk us through the first portions of the budget that deal with the city programmatic side. If you look at the very top there, and we're looking in the far right-hand column, that FY 2021 proposed budget, you'll see that the staff recommendation is that the city and LPS put in the same amount for this upcoming fiscal year as they did for the current fiscal year. When staff got together to put together a proposed budget for your consideration, we were not in the middle of a global pandemic, but at the same time, LPS already knew that they were going to have some challenges budget-wise with what was happening with the state aid formula. So back then, as now, your city staff and your LPS staff is recommending that there is no increase in that overall funding. So again, walking through the formula, when you add those 2 numbers together, the next thing you do after that is you deduct the city CLC expenses. That is that $536,000 figure that you see about midway through that first page. I will say on that figure, that is not a reflection of our actual expenses for the city. That is the result of 2 things. One, under the interlocal agreement, the city's costs there can only go up so much. We can only take credit for so much. Second, the city discontinued serving as the lead agency at the Goodrich Middle School this year. So that number that you see, that $536,000 and change, is a reflection of those 2 factors. So again, we've added the 2 numbers together and we're deducting the city's CLC expenses, which comes up with that net programming funding, that important number that we talked about earlier of $1.647 million and some change. We're going to move on now to the blue category, the protective programming. And remember, under the interlocal agreement, we can spend no more than 30% of those interlocal dollars on police officers. So as we look at that area of the budget, you may also remember that we have a separate agreement between the city and LPS for the contractual costs of those officers who are serving in our schools. Under that separate agreement then, LPS pays the city a certain amount per officer. So the numbers that you see here are not the actual cost of the actual officer who is serving in that school. It is the contracted cost of the officer that is set pursuant to that separate agreement between the city and LPS. So as we walk through that far right-hand column, you will see that there's an increase, there's a proposed increase in the per officer cost of 4%. The current separate agreement between the city and LPS for that contractual per officer cost expires in August. Chief Blymeister and his team tell us that they're expecting a 4% increase, at least a 4% increase in that contractual per officer cost. So you will see that 4% increase between 1920 and 2021. Remember, we have the 6 middle school officers that are funded pursuant to this initiative, along with that threat assessment officer. So when you take that per officer cost times the 7 officers, you come up with that $504,010 figure that you see towards the bottom of that blue box. Again, however, remember that under the interlocal agreement, the city can only claim 30% of the net program funding for officers. When you make that calculation, you come up with $494,206. So the total contractual cost for the officers are $504,10, but pursuant to that restriction in the interlocal agreement, the city can only take credit for that $494,206. So that walks us through the city CLC side and the LPD side. I'll go ahead and turn it over to John and Nola to cover the last 2 pieces, and I'll also stay up here for questions.
The section I'm going to cover is the mental health section, which is the section in orange. This one particular section makes up 26% of the expenditure from the Safe and Successful Kids Interlocal Fund. That number is determined really by the other 2 categories. The protective category can't be above 30%, and CLC has to be above 40%. So the mental health portion is that amount of money that's left in between. It is remaining the same as the year before. So the social worker also works with the threat assessment team, as well as coordinating the effort of these mental health contractual services, continues at the same value. You'll see a slight increase in the contracted behavioral health services from $312,000 to $331,000. Those are contracted services through Hope Spoke Family Service in Blue Valley to provide service at elementary and middle schools. Those particular services, this last year, we were able to add services through Family Service at 6 elementaries, Hope Spoke at 2 additional elementaries, as well as helping with some non-Medicaid students, and we're able to add 5 middle schools and 11 elementary schools through Blue Valley. So an incredible difference. But I'd like to echo what Ms. Pierce said before, is this is a proportion of the overall investment in mental health services. In the same way, this provides an incredibly stable and important part of the overall investment in SRO. This provides an important, stable part of mental health, but it doesn't reflect everything. I want to point out one other difference. You'll notice in 1819 that only 19% of the what was originally identified was used rather than 26%. And part of that was because we hired the social worker, and we were able to get the mental health therapist online before we could start seeing clients, which caused a delay in starting. And for an example, if you have one therapist seeing 10 clients, you can't add additional clients in the middle of the year because you work with clients multiple years. So once you start late, one therapist with 10 clients at 70% of the year, you're only going to use up 70% of your funds, because when they start the next year, they're still going to have those 10 clients, and you're going to need to have that 100% pay. So as you look at future years, 19, 20, 21, you'll see a closer full expenditure of those dollars It was just the uniqueness of the services provided and the timing that they were provided that caused less of the full use of those resources. It's not that they weren't valued. Be happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Ms. Derby Bennett for.
As I go through it, I'm seeing that there's lower allocated than what the cost is. Which budget does that come out of? And that's for people who aren't here looking at it.
Sure. For the service we provide, for the contractual services, we cover from the SSK what the cost is to the organization. So it will not pull out more from our general funds, but those, when we work with Family Service, Hope Spoke, and Boo Valley, they'll provide a combination of income sources to cover the costs. So some of the cost of a therapist might come from the SSK fund, but they also might pull funds from private grants or other funds to cover the full cost of the therapist. But our contract covers the services we provide.
I really like being able to explain it to my constituents that the money's there, it's just in different pots of money.
Right. It's a lot of braided funding, and actually, Ms. Derby Bennett will be able to describe that even better than I can, because CLCs is the best example of effective use of braided funding.
Thank you.
Other questions for Mr. Neal in this section? Thank you. I didn't do the same thing for Ms. Pierce. Well, you can come back up. Were there questions for Ms. Pierce? We didn't.
I just wanted to echo what John said about for the SROs, this is one portion. Thank you for bringing this
Yeah.
up. This is one portion of the SRO program funding. This is the 6 middle school officers. We also have our officers in the high schools as well.
Thank you.
Scary, I'm understanding all this.
Well, hopefully we don't
Yeah.
go off the tracks
Richard,
here.
you have an advantage
And we're
that,
two-
yeah, you have an advantage that you've been on both boards. You understand it from both ends.
I know what it all means.
So we're 2/3 too? Are you the cleanup presenter?
Cleanup, that's me. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the proactive programming, or the funding that goes to support the community learning centers out of this budget. And so the top item there, the community learning centers initiative leadership staff, the increase there really just reflects the staffing increases. I just, for the pieces of that section that are staff increases, I just increased it by 3%. And so we pay out of that line item a portion of our data entry administrative assistant that's in our office, and then the greatest portion of it is the evaluator that we contract with through the ESU to provide us with lots of great data and evaluation about the work of the community learning centers. I'm going to jump to the CLC STEAM programming line item. It's $145,000. That reflects $5,000 per site for the 29 CLC sites. So if you look back to the original budget that was approved back in the 18-19 budget, that was $130,000. Again, it was $5,000 per site. We had 26 sites at that time. Since then, we've added 3 additional sites, so we just continued with that $5,000 per site. And so that's the $145,000. Then the next line item down is the scholarships, family learning support services, and SCC's school community coordinators at future CLC sites. And so this is kind of a bucket of a few different things, but we're able to provide scholarship opportunities for families who don't have the ability to pay for childcare or the CLC programming, which is only the all day, every day, or the before and after every day enrolled programming. All CLC clubs are free to families. I want to make that very clear. But for families who do need enrolled every day before and after school care, we can help scholarship that so that no family wouldn't have access to it based on their inability to pay. So at this time, in the time when we're in this pandemic, that is actually a great time to be able to use those scholarship dollars. We do have 3 sites that are still operational and are serving families right now, and so that full day care expense is much higher than a before and after school care expense would be, and so we're able to use those scholarship dollars right now for families who are definitely struggling but who are still getting to work every day, and so we're able to use those scholarship dollars then.
Which 3 sites?
3 sites, Calvert Rec Center, Belmont Rec Center, and then Northeast Family Center has an off-site. They actually run a childcare out of their building in Northeast Lincoln, and so they are actually serving students from both Brownell and Norwood Park which are their 2 CLC sites. They're the lead agencies for those 2 sites. And then they are also serving students from other schools. So they have students from Pershing. I know they have one from Elliott who's attending right now. So they are actually taking in other CLC sites' children to be able to serve them, not in a school building, off-site, in their Northeast Family Center location.
Is that at the old Havelock School? That's what I call it.
Yes, yeah, yep, that's right. So that's,
Jackson High is Huntington. You got the wrong one.
so that's kind of a summary of what those dollars pay for out of that pot. And then there's also some family learning and family engagement opportunities out of that pot of money as well. And then we're going to go back up to the Community Learning Center programming line item. The increase there is the difference. So it's everything, the additional funds that we were able to add to the CLC section, that I put them all in the programming line item. So anything that didn't have a name somewhere else, and really it's the other increase is only just the leadership staff increase. All the other dollars went into the programming line item. So I'm happy to answer questions about that if anyone has any. I do want to point out, just like everyone else has said, this budget, this line item in our budget is about 8% of the total CLC budget. So again, it's that braided funding. We are able to bring in funds from lots of different areas, and the interlocal funding that braids into our overall budget reflects about 8% of our total $8.6 million budget. So it certainly is wonderful to have. We've seen the examples that it's, having this investment from both the city and the school district side, this formalized investment on the national level is a best practice as far as having this level of commitment from our local entities. And then the other thing I would say is we've been able to see the impact of it on a local level by being able to leverage the dollars that are committed here into additional private dollars. And that, I think the best example of that is the reflection of a $385,000 commitment from the Sherwood Foundation to, which actually is was a match last year for the programming dollars that were committed here. So this is a great commitment to the CLCs and is a portion of our much larger budget.
Thank you, Ms. Bennett. Ms. Danik?
First, I'm really glad we're able to have a couple of open sites.
Yes.
Because I
Me
know
too.
There are a lot of parents that are really anxious about this.
Absolutely.
The second question I have was on the mental health opportunities that families may have been using when the schools were open. Now that the schools are closed, are they having access to those services?
One thing that I know, and I'm going to let Mr. Neal follow up, one thing that I do know is that some of our partners are working toward, and I don't know how close they've gotten to this yet, but they're working on some telehealth options. And so Mr. Neal may have more information on that than I do, but that's the information that I have at this point, is that there is an effort being made to get to a telehealth option.
Work in progress.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, the mental, I don't know if Mr. Ewing could jump into the Zoom, but he's already reached out to our 3 providers to set up telehealth services. I don't know how far along it is on the process, but they started that effort immediately.
It's such an uncertain time for a whole lot of families, and want to make sure that those things are available if they know where they could reach them and who to contact. So
And in fact, some of,
That's Mr. Ewing preparing to
Okay.
answer. Please,
And-
we'll
and-
watch the audio. Please continue.
in some of the additional funding we had, because we did start late with mental health, was able to provide funding to secure telehealth. Comes in a couple different levels. One is just information, requires one level of privacy. The other is another level of privacy to meet the HIPAA requirements for therapy to go back and forth. We're able to fund that telehealth service so our 3 providers could continue.
that's awesome, thank you.
And Mr. Ewing, did you want to add something to that? I was told there was a little bit of technology delay. Maybe John answered it, so yeah. I think I'm going to take that as a, no, he doesn't want, oh, here we are.
It said our agencies are using. Can you hear me?
I think I'm gonna take that as a.
Yes, there's a little bit of a lag in technology, and I'm sorry I stepped on you. Wait about 7 seconds, then start.
Yes, there's a little bit of a lag in technology.
It's more than 7.
About 7 seconds, then start.
Okay, so our agencies have been using Zoom to do some therapy through Zoom. And in other cases, they are working on reaching out to the parents and getting that agreement to use Zoom in order to continue therapy. So all three of them are on it and either working with students or working to reach out to parents to work with students.
Thank you. Ms. Danik, did that answer your question?
It absolutely did. Thank you so much for being proactive, because we've kind of redesigned an entire curriculum in 2 weeks.
Yes.
From a school district, from a CLC, and I am so impressed with the people that are doing all this work. So thank you for your hard work.
Thank you, Mr. Ewing. Other questions from this section, Ms. Bennett? All right, so, yes.
Yeah, not a question, but I did want to emphasize something that Nola had said that I think is really important when thinking about CLC funding. This interlocal board, you said 8% of your funding is coming from this interlocal board. So 92% of the CLC funding is coming from things like the federal grants, our community partners, a variety of other sources. And that's incredibly inspiring to me of the community partnerships involved from public sector, private sector, to make this work. And then the other thing that I really think is worth emphasizing that you mentioned is this agreement between the city and the school board has helped leverage private dollars, the Sherwood Foundation grant that you mentioned, that just opens up even more opportunities. So we are getting an incredible bang for our buck to fund 8% to be able to help leverage additional funding coming in. It's just an incredible thing. So I thank you, Nola, for all your work in getting all that to work.
Agreed. Hear, hear.
Go ahead.
I was
Denise?
just going to say, Mr. Chair, when we're about to close, just a reminder that this is just the first reading on the budget. If any of you have any questions that you come up with later, please feel free to forward it to one of the three of us. We'll funnel them to the appropriate people if we can answer it, and then the vote would be presumably at the next meeting if we're all here together. Thank you.
And I do have a question about that next meeting.
Yeah, that's
so,
what I was-
as I recall, we had scheduled that meeting to be an evening meeting, and the purpose of that was to help enhance opportunities for the public to come and provide some feedback. Given right now there may be members of the public that would be disinclined to come give us feedback at a meeting, what other mechanisms exist, either through like the websites or emails, et cetera, that people who look at this budget and say, man, I really want to tell them this, how should they get in touch with us about that?
I think there's multiple ways to get in touch. We'll take any and all comments, whether that is by email to the Parks and Rec Department, whether that's through the Let's Talk system through LPS, whether it's a phone call, an email, a text, anything. We'll take any and all forms of comment. If you don't know where to start, I would say go ahead and just give the Parks Department a call, and they will funnel them to me, and I'll get it to the appropriate people.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And that was scheduled for an April meeting next,
April
right?
23rd.
That is for our April meeting is when we're scheduled to vote on the budget.
Vote on the budget. I'm sorry, thank you, Ms. Danny. Mr. McGinnis.
Thank you, Benny. Couple of quick questions about the budget. The fiscal year is when? What's the year of the?
The fiscal year starts on September 1st.
Okay. And so we would have time after April. If something happened and we were unable to meet for the April meeting, we would still have time to approve the budget.
We will go ahead and work through those issues with our respective legal counsels. There is
Okay.
some language in, I believe it's the interlocal agreement that says we're supposed to have it adopted by May. These are extraordinary times. We'll figure it out.
Okay, and let us know if we have
Right.
to.
It won't be official until the board and the city council
Right.
approve their budgets. Our recommendations to each of our.
Thank you, Mr. Neal. Yes.
Our
I should have done that.
The recommendation from this board goes then to the city council and the school boards, who then have to reconcile it in their own budget approval process.
Thank you.
Okay.
Other questions? So that takes us through our agenda, basically. If there are no other comments or discussions to be brought before the board at this time, Anyone? Yes, Mr. McGinnis.
I'd just like to say thank you. This is a good group that seems to have got it put together, and they can put it in a way that even I can understand it. So, really appreciate everybody's hard work, and it's good work too, especially now. And with that, I'd like to move for adjournment.
We have a motion by Mr. McGinnis, second by Ms. Danick. Do we call the roll on that, or do we just
Yeah,
call ourselves adjourned?
Call it.
We've
Let's call
done
the roll.
both.
Okay, let's do the roll this time.
Okay. Mr. Boswell?
Yes.
Ms. Danick?
Yes.
Mr. McGinnis?
Yes.
Mr. Shob?
Yes, we are adjourned.